Well, welcome to the October Tools of the Trade webinar, Coping with Coping Styles, as is befitting a topic on self-sacrificing and perfectionism. This title all by itself went through several iterations, and the content has changed a fair bit since I first came up with this one, because I couldn't stop playing with it. Because as it turns out, when you are creating a presentation on self-sacrificing and perfectionism, it's quite triggering of your own self-sacrificing perfectionistic things, and it's very hard to let go and say, okay, it's done. So this is a topic that I feel very, very passionate about, and I think that is very, very important for therapists from all disciplines and all backgrounds, because it's something that, well, a lot of us experience personally, but it's also something that a lot of our clients struggle with and come to us and you know, want help to fix. And like I said, even putting this presentation together can be quite triggering of my own stuff. So working with clients who also have these types of presentations can be quite triggering of our own stuff, and can really, well, as we'll see, you know, can really contribute to things like burnout and dissatisfaction with work, that kind of thing. So I thought I would start this one off with the story of, I don't know, I suppose it's the first time I really became aware of the extent of perfectionism. I always thought perfectionism was, you know, that you did things perfectly, that you liked to do things perfectly. I didn't really understand what it was actually about until I went to my first therapy session, and I had become very depressed. I had lost a job, I was having some health problems, all of these things that I had previously very much tied up into my identity and my worth as a person were gone, and I became depressed because, again, as we will talk about later, that's quite a normal thing when you've been living in your coping styles and those coping styles get challenged. It doesn't leave you a lot of places to go. So I go to see this psychologist, and he says very quickly, look, I get that you probably want some sort of checklist from me, right? You want something to go home and work your way through, and by the end of that checklist, you'll feel better. And I so clearly remember sitting there going, he's a witch. Because I couldn't understand how he could know me so well in the first like 20 minutes of the session. But what he was knowing, what he was recognizing, were my coping styles, and my coping styles were very much that unrelenting standards and perfectionism, self-sacrificing stuff, and he nailed it. Side note, he's also then one of the reasons why I went on and went into psychology and discovered, no, he wasn't a witch. He was just a very experienced psychologist. But probably from then, and that work that I did with Sam was a lot of working on this stuff. And so I am coming from a place of, I know how sneaky these coping styles can be, and I also know what a big difference it makes if you can start working on them. I also know it is a continual process. It doesn't just, there is no checklist, there is no do this, 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 and this, and it'll all be fine. It is definitely a continual process, but hopefully after today, you'll have a bit more of an idea of the types of things you can be doing to help that process, and whether that's, yeah, personally for you or with your clients. So let's have a look at some of the costs of living in our coping styles, and not looking underneath. So we know that it's exhausting. We know that it's really tiring, because you're constantly going. You can't stop. If you stop, you'll feel the shame, and you can't bear that. So you've always got to be doing. Rest just isn't an option. Even things like, uh, for a while there, I had to be listening to an audiobook when I was going to sleep, because otherwise my head would start ticking on, the things that I did wrong during the day, on people that I may have let down, of, I had to cancel on that client and that feels really bad. It keeps playing the song in your head of all the ways that you didn't live up to those standards, because by the time you've been on this merry-go-round for 20, 30, 40 years, you're a fair way up. If we compare it to the addiction and like a drug addiction, your tolerance is pretty high. So your standards for yourself are pretty high. But it also means that, aside from being exhausting and leave you feeling constantly depleted, you miss out on actual attunement and actual connection, because if you're avoiding and blocking your real self, your core self, your wise self, your healthy adult, whatever you want to call it, but if you're blocking that part, if you're only interacting as your coping styles, then where's the actual connection with yourself? RuPaul says it well. If you can't love yourself, how are you going to love someone else? And I think that's kind of the message of this. If you can't live with yourself, how are you going to expect anybody else to? And whether that's clients or in your own personal life, the more time you spend in your coping styles, the more you're robbing people, including yourself, of the chance to actually get to know the real person, with all its bumps and lumps and imperfections, which we will talk about a bit as well. It also means that you are constantly failing, because by definition, these are impossible standards that you're trying to live up to. They are, quite simply, you're never going to hit that goal, because every time you do hit a goal, the perfectionistic voice says, oh, well, it can't have been that hard then. Obviously, we need to make it harder. There's no ability to stop and rest and go, that was good. That was well done. It's like, okay, on to the next thing. So it's literally impossible to satisfy that voice, that hunger, that drive. You will never be perfect enough. And it then ends up just perpetuating the shame, making it worse, because you failed, because you let someone down, because you didn't complete a task on time or as well as you would have liked to. And every time you fail, it just amps that shame up even further, which again just perpetuates the cycle of needing to go more and more into the coping styles. And it doesn't resolve the initial conflict. It doesn't resolve the initial issue. It doesn't help you get those needs met that were denied early on when all of these coping styles started. It means that you keep suffering. It means that you keep carrying that shame, and it means the more you avoid it, it means that you keep reminding yourself almost, I can't handle this shame. It's too much. It's too big. And I know everybody talks about the oxygen mask analogy for self-sacrificing in particular, and the idea that when you're on a plane, the oxygen masks drop down, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first before you help other people. Very, very good point, very useful, but I would extend that a bit further as well and say, not only is it the sensible thing to do, because if you don't put yours on first and you're unconscious, well then, yeah, you can't help anybody anyway. But by putting your own oxygen mask on, you learn how to do it. You're better placed to show someone else, to help someone else to do it, if you figured it out for yourself. And I find for working with perfectionistic and self-sacrificing clients, sometimes phrasing it in that way can help deal with the initial shame. If you can say, hey, I'm taking some of this time so I can learn to better help someone else down the track. It can be a nice little, it's a little bit of deception, but yeah, it's deceiving the coping styles, not yourself, so it's okay. But I think that is actually a really, really important point. You know, as therapists, if we've gone into that cycle of I have to be doing for my clients, I have to be doing it perfectly, reminding yourself that working on this for yourself is actually going to be ultimately really helpful for your clients as well, because you're going to literally know the pathway. You're going to know how hard it is, and you're going to know what it looks like. And it means that we stop this cycle. So in this cycle, we have the triggering event, and it could be absolutely anything. If anyone wants to give me an example, that will be fine. I will go with that. But otherwise, we'll talk in general terms, and then I've got a couple of specific examples after this. So we have a triggering event, which puts us into our coping modes. So maybe it's maybe it's losing your place in a talk like this. And I mean, preparing these talks all by itself, presenting anything to colleagues is always a bit nerve-wracking. And then if I lose my train of thought, or I stumble a bit over a word, or I mispronounce something or whatever, it would be very, very easy to feel shame, to feel embarrassed, to feel exposed, and go into my coping modes. And when I go into my coping modes, what happens is I disconnect from you. I disconnect from what I'm doing, and I just go a bit on automatic pilot. But I lose touch with my authentic self. I lose the ability to share some of those stories. I lose the ability to you know, a bit different in a presentation like this as well, but I lose the ability to connect with you as another human being, really. And the same thing happens in therapy. The same thing happens with a partner. The same thing happens in any of your relationships. If you go into your coping modes, your coping styles, you lose touch with your actual self, which means you lose the chance to have authentic connections with other people, which in therapy is not terribly helpful. As soon as we lose that ability to connect, other people feel disconnected from us. And as therapists, we find that boring. We don't want to just connect with someone's coping styles. One, because it'll often put us into our coping styles. But two, there's no connection there. And if there's no connection, then there's no capacity for healing or recovery or change or any of that sort of stuff. Because you've just got two people in a room interacting via their coping styles. We've lost the actual human connection that can facilitate change. So two people working or two coping styles just clashing, or colluding, that's the other thing. If we talk about schema chemistry, schema clashing, we're talking about, say I've got a self-sacrificing coping style, and my client has an entitlement coping style. Those will actually mesh. The client will keep taking, I'll keep giving, and the client doesn't get anywhere and I'm exhausted. Or we've got a clash where we've got two people with self-sacrificing and nothing ever moves because nobody wants to, you know, upset the other person or anything like that. But whichever way you look at it, all that it means is you get further and further and further apart, which as a therapist is going to set off your shame stuff big time. And again, there's no chance to resolve what's going on. And we know that unrelenting standards and self-sacrificing, in particular, those coping styles all by themselves account for 24% of the variance in burnout. So the more unrelenting standards, self-sacrificing stuff that's going on for you, the more likely you are to burn out. And this is a big reason why, because you're setting up a perpetuating cycle that cannot end in good resolutions for you or your clients. So you're going to start to feel really hopeless as a therapist. Why are none of my clients connecting? Why are none of them getting better?